is you're a man of strong feelings and particularly well thought out explanations for why you do the things you do.
That sets me up terribly, but I appreciate that.
Please welcome Chairman Smith.
Thank you.
Well
Thanks,
done,
I appreciate that introduction. That's like saying this guy never misses a field goal. You don't necessarily want to start out
Yes,
that way,
sir.
but
it's entirely up to you. We can talk here, or we can move
oh,
to
no,
the back.
I'm good. I'll talk for a couple
Yes, sir.
minutes,
Go
then
right
we'll
ahead.
go back there.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
thank you. I really want to thank Jim for putting this together as he does, every year. It's a great opportunity to discuss the issues that are most important at the Department of Defense and where we're headed with national defense and national security policy. And I just want to, sort of cue this up by saying this is an incredibly important time. There are major transitions going on at the Pentagon that have been started for a long time, but are really picking up speed. And that transition is basically understanding the incredible importance of information warfare and survivability. The number of platforms you have continues to be a factor, but now the factor that is emerging is, can you get the information out there to the people who need it in real time so that you can see and take advantage of that information? And then, are your platforms survivable? Because if the enemy is able to cut off your information and shut everything down because it's how dependent we are upon command and control, then all the aircraft carriers and jet planes and tanks in the world aren't going to do you any good because they can't move. So we have got to improve our information system, our ability to gather information, our ability to process information, our ability to get it to the people who need it, and our ability to protect it. And last, but certainly not least, our ability to disrupt our adversaries' information. That's the advantage. And then the other piece is the survivability piece. There's a whole bunch of different elements of that, but the thing that I'm really fascinated by is the rise of the swarm of drones, if you will, which we are very concerned about in the Middle East. We've had a fair number of drone attacks, and in the recent fighting in Azerbaijan and Armenia, these were major factors. So the drones, you couldn't see them. They were tiny little things that packed a lot bigger punch than you would have thought, but the key was you couldn't see them. Big, fast airplane with all kinds of weaponry. If you can see it, it's not as advantageous. There are 1,000 different little details in how we make that transition to build the force that is in the best position to deter our adversaries, but that's the transition that's going on in national security policy right now and at the Pentagon, and what my committee is really focused on. Lastly, just quickly, to address these issues, we did a task force last year called the Future of Defense Task Force that Seth Moulton and Jim Banks led. This year, right now, we have a task force on the supply chain that Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Gallagher are leading. And that is, trying to figure out the answers to these questions. Lastly, that's why we formed the new subcommittee that is focused directly on artificial intelligence and technology to give the emphasis to this part of national security that's so important. Obviously, there's a bunch of other things going on, but I know Jim will cover them when we talk. So I'll look forward to the chance to sit down and have that conversation. And as always, it's great to be here.
Yes, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
Hi. Chairman, how you doing? Good to see you.
As you remember, Undersecretary Mr. Schaefer, Al?
Yes.
Sir, you have the floor. I know that you're never at a loss for words. So, just a thought. Al, do you want to jump in, or do you want to?
No, however you like to handle
I
this,
think
Chairman.
we're in the Q&A section.
We're in
here,
the Q&A
so I'm
section.
happy to answer whatever question you or anybody else wants to raise. And you got a great setup here. You should do your own talk show once this is done.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
This
sir.
looks really good.
We call it the mosh pit, sir.
I wish it were that easy. Congressman Brown yesterday talked a little bit when he was here about the NDAA coming in after the infrastructure bill. Do you foresee that will cause any problems in the timing at all of getting the NDAA out next year? And how optimistic are you to be able to push through a bill with at any type of speed that the department needs?
Yeah, I'm optimistic we'll get it done. And to answer your question, yeah, it'll create problems, but every year creates problems. If we go first, if we go second, if the Democrats are in control of one body or the other. There's always problems, but we always find a way around them. A lot of them are similar. Some of them are a little bit different. You work through it, and we work through it because of our commitment to a bipartisan, bicameral effort to get the defense bill done. Now, I'd prefer if we got it done in sort of the October-November timeframe instead of the late December timeframe that we've been working on the last couple of years.
Yes,
but
yes, sir.
If that's how much time it takes, that's how much time it takes. It's always a challenge, but I am confident we will, as always, 60 straight years now, we'll meet that challenge and we'll get the bill done.
But Chairman, and I do apologize, I should have started off just from my previous positions, being the head of R&E in the department and then the deputy at acquisition and sustainment. We cannot do our job without a very close working relationship with Congress, and that included you and it included Mr. Thornberry. I would like to thank you from that side of the building, so I'm no longer in there, but from that side of the river, how important that is to us. So thank you for your support of the department. And now we'll go into some of the other hard questions. So there's a lot of talk in the press about where we're going to end up with a budget number. And in fact, I was reading this morning that the other side is going to be pushing for a number of on the order of $750 billion. What's your view about how the compromise is going to come down, and where do you think we're going to end up?
Yeah, it's, first of all, the numbers we're talking about are different. And we have Department of Energy in my bill, so our number already is 753. So I assume you're talking about adding 35 billion to the 715 number that was added out there. I don't know where we're going to come down on the number. I do think that focus, and I've said this many times in the last few weeks, is the wrong focus. The problem we have at the department is not how much money we've got, it's how we're spending it. Yeah. And that is my big point when the F-35 is not the only problem, and I do understand how important the platform is, but the amount of money over budget it is, the amount of time it has taken, the sustainment costs, the problems with the engine, it is indicative of 20 years of too many mistakes on programs that were, that wound up being too expensive and didn't deliver the capability that they said they were going to deliver. We sort of fell in love with a computer model and didn't think logically. We have got to fix that, and we've got to fix acquisition. We don't buy software well because of the time it takes and a whole bunch of other reasons. So having an extended fight over whether or not it's, I used the bigger number, whether it's 740 or 750 or 760, I think is a waste of time. There is no doubt in my mind, not a scintilla, that we can adequately defend this country for $753 billion. And if we can't, then we're in a whole lot of trouble no matter what the number is. So I hope we'll move away from that debate. I will point out that last year, in the Trump administration, we went from 738 the previous year to 741. Yeah. So that's pretty much a zero increase. Everyone voted for it, and everyone was fine with it. Now all of a sudden, President Biden puts out a number that's actually more of an increase than that, and that's a problem. I don't think it's where we should be spending our time.
Yes, sir. And to take one on the chin, sir, I apologize, sir. That was my first question. That was
the question needs to be asked because the discussion is out there, and I want to make sure that I push my point of view.
Yes, sir.
Which is let's talk about where we're spending that money. Let's talk about, as you mentioned, we were talking before, Chief of Staff Brown, General Brown.
Yes, sir.
We can go for 7.5. We see what Commandant Berger is doing with the Marine Corps, trying to reorient it towards the fight that we need to be prepared. That is the conversation that we need to be having.
I have a whole bunch of questions here. I'm going to dispense with those and go to question and answer after I ask one question.
Sure.
And you kind of talked about this a little bit, but what do you see are the big 3 to 5 big ticket items that you would like to take on in the NDAA this year?
Well, 5 is a lot.
Well, make it 3, sir.
But I'll try. I'll start talking. We'll see how many I get through. Acquisition, number 1. Like I said, how can we buy things more efficiently, more effectively, particularly in technology? Yeah. And in this case, the report that Eric Schmidt and Bob Work did on AI and the broader issue is really crucial to everything we're doing. How do we better buy technology and better use technology to meet our needs would be number 1 without any question. Number 2, I think we do have some issues with the force. We've seen this out of Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, the number of suicides, the number of violent crimes, sexual assault. What's going on with the people who are serving in the military? Because I think it's a problem. Certainly there's been a lot of focus on extremism in the military. I think we need to really take a hard look at how can we better serve the people who are serving us. That would be, I think, the top two issues that I'm focused on, and then a lot of things sort of flow down from those two issues.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to think what else were we talking about? Oh, figuring out the China issue. What does our force need to look like to deter China? China is an enormous focus of what we're doing. I am worried about the terminology that we need to build a military that can, quote, dominate China. I'm not sure that that's necessary, and I'm not sure that it's possible. I think if we look at it from a deterrence, whole of government standpoint, that changes the equation. So I would say those are the top three things. Buying our stuff better, more efficiently, more effectively, particularly in the technology area, dealing with the force, and how do we build a strategy around how to confront China. Those are the top three things, and a whole bunch of things flow down from that.
Chairman, if you can solve those three, you'll get a holiday break in December.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
we're not going to want them.
I know,
I want
know.
to put us on a path
Yep.
to deal with them as intelligently and capably as possible, and this is really an important sort of philosophical point. And Bob Gates used to make this point really well, and the military talks about it all the time. Our job is managing risk.
Yep.
And I think we get caught up, and we've seen this in the COVID world, but that would get me into a whole other conversation. We get caught up in the idea, no, wait a second, I want no risk in my life. All right? I want to make sure that life doesn't work that way.
Correct.
So we're managing risk. How do we manage it intelligently? And I think we need to do a better job of that.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Do you mind if we go to the questions? We have a number of people from the press who would like to ask you questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's start with Valerie Insana from Inside Defense News. Valerie, you there? Okay, she's not. Okay. Well, then we'll go to Jeff Green from Jeff Green and Company. Jeff?
Thanks, Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Chairman, question about the Supply Chain Task Force. Recently, Mike Gallagher, who's one of the co-chairs, said it's no longer going to be acceptable for industry to say our supply chains are really complex, we don't understand them. So I wonder if you agree with that sentiment, and if you do, if it's going to be the responsibility, in your view, of the department to understand and solve supply chain issues, of industry, of both, and if it's of both, how are we going to get at the issue of dealing with companies that have largely commercial supply chains that sometimes rely on China? I'm just wondering how you're going to sort through those myriad of issues.
Yeah, no, I think supply chain is really important. I will say, sort of back to sort of the managing risk and accepting an imperfect world, I don't think the supply chain is the utter disaster a lot of people talk about. It's really difficult. I mean, and within that context, when you think of everything that needs to go into building, the F-35 is at the top of my mind, but the F-35 or any piece of equipment, all the component pieces, all the technology, everything that's going to go into that, it's going to be a complicated process. So I don't know that I would necessarily agree that we're going to, quote, figure it out, but I do think we need to have a better plan for how to deal with the challenges and to understand, crucially, what do we need? What are the core important things that we cannot afford to be without? And how do we build resiliency within the supply chain to give us the best chance, not a guarantee, but the best chance to make sure that we can access what we need? And I think there are two more important principles that need to come out of that. One, this isn't really so much about Buy America. That's a part of it. Certainly if it's made in America, there's reliability there. I view it more as trusted partners, okay? Who can we rely on the most in the world? And so, yes, Buy America, let's try to build as much domestic capability as we possibly can, but then let's also think more broadly, said, okay, well, maybe we can't make it in America, but we can make it in a country that's more closely allied to us than China, okay? So that we don't have to rely on that. And then the last point, references into the China, what do we do about the fact that China is such a large manufacturer and makes so many things that we are dependent upon? And I think we need to get very aggressive about finding alternatives. We're not going to stop buying stuff from China. When that day happens, we're going to be in a very, very conflicted and difficult world. But are there things that we can reduce and build more reliance? And I know I'm working with you on one of those particular issues, but I think we need to look at that. If there is an alternative, if there's a better way, a better place to find something than China, then I think we need to be very aggressive about developing that. Again, doesn't have to be in the U.S. That's choice number one, but are there trusted partners out there? We see this in the telecommunications area most directly, the whole Huawei, ZTE, and others. We're going out to our partners like South Korea and Great Britain and telling them, don't buy from China. And they're like, well, okay, well, what do you got? Yeah. Right? We need this.
Right.
And if you don't got it, then what are we going to do? We have to create a situation where we're not going to South Korea and Great Britain and others and saying, don't buy from China. We're going to them and saying, buy this instead. And maybe it's from Europe, maybe it's from Vietnam or India, maybe it's from us, but that's how you build the resiliency. So that's what I think they're doing. And I'm happy that Alyssa and Mike are working on that. They're two of our more brighter and more capable members. So I will look forward to their conclusions.
Chairman, thank you. And by the way, that your answer heartens or makes me very happy, because I'm spending time now trying to look at how do we ensure we have microelectronics necessary for America, not just for defense, but for our overall economy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, and Jeff, that's the last part of the question I didn't really answer. The other key part of this, and this gets into the technology issue in AI, is strengthening the partnership between the Department of Defense and the commercial sector. We see this in space a lot.
Right.
There's been this huge growth on the commercial side, and with that growth comes technological advancement. How can we better take advantage of that at DoD? And that gets into off-the-shelf technology, buying commercial, reducing the program of record dependence, and really giving the flexibility to the Pentagon to buy the best systems and the best technology that's out there, instead of being trapped in some program of record that was approved 10 years ago and we're still working on. We really need to get more nimble in that regard. And again, I would reference Bob Work and Eric Schmidt's report on AI as some of the steps that are necessary to get us there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. We will now turn to Tony Bertucca from inside the Pentagon. Tony, are you out there?
Yes, I am. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. My question kind of tails well with what Jeff just asked you about. You've recently talked about a desire to get at vendor lock at the Pentagon and sort of trying to reset the business dynamic with defense contractors in terms of intellectual property and trying to incentivize contractors to perform better. I was wondering if you would seek to do this in the NDAA. Do you see a legislative path to kind of get this result?
We are looking at those options right now as we get ready for the bill, and that's certainly part of it. The other part of it is the culture within the Pentagon and the decisions that they make. And I think there are two important principles. Well, one of them actually, there's three. One of them is the one I just talked about on not being so dependent on the program of record. I have a long analogy about the jitters radio and how that thing played out.
Yes, sir.
To give you an example of the wrong way to do it. So free that up by not locking ourselves into programs of record and going out there and buying stuff is certainly one way to address the vendor lock problem. The other issue is on intellectual property. And I confess, 20 years ago when I first looked at this issue, I reached the wrong conclusion. And that is, when you're buying, when you're giving a contract to somebody, who owns the intellectual property? Typically what we've done is we've let the vendor own it. Now, because the vendor's not going to develop this system and then just give you the intellectual property so that you can then give it to their competitors. You can see where, well, that would at least create more competition, but they're not going to do that. But the government can hold on to the IP and therefore have a little bit of flexibility in terms of solving problems. Like, a lot of what I'm talking about here is the difference between the way the B-21 is being developed versus the way the F-35 is being developed. The B-21, they held on to the intellectual property. It's a lot more upgradable. They are able to implement new technology more quickly. They didn't get locked into a whole lot of requirements. And as a consequence, that program is going a ton better. We've learned those lessons. So is there something we can do on the intellectual property side in terms of who does it? And then the last issue is competition. Now, this is, regrettably, as most things in life are, not as simple as it sounds. Basically the idea is, wherever you can compete something, you want to compete it. We want to try to encourage as many small, innovative companies to come in and compete, not get locked into the bigger companies. Sorry, it's a little bit off the point here. Bigger companies are capable of innovating, but there's only one time when bigger companies innovate, and that's when they think they're threatened. If a bigger company thinks that, okay, we've got a great idea, they're buying it, and they're going to keep on buying it for the rest of whatever, so why would we innovate? If we innovate, we got the potential of putting ourselves out of business. We're not going to do that. If, on the other hand, they know that, okay, we got this, but these people are coming for us, and they're developing a better technology, then they will compete, and they will be innovative. It's not that they're not capable of innovation. It's just that it doesn't fit their needs unless you create that competitive environment. And that's what I'm trying to do. Create the environment where people are incentivized to compete. Now, the limitation on this is playing out a little bit over on the NASA side with the lunar lander. NASA didn't have enough money, arguably, the people who are arguing about that right now, to keep developing 2 lunar landers. So they went down to 1. Well, that's a problem because it undermines the competition. But can you really afford to buy 2? I think there's more flexibility in that instance to get there. So it's not as simple as that. But wherever you can, maintain competition. I guess the better analogy would be when Boeing and Lockheed competed for the F-35. It wouldn't have made sense to buy 2 F-35s. It just wouldn't have. Now, did it make sense to give Lockheed Martin all the IP so that they could, really sort of have us over the barrel when it came to reducing sustainment costs? Probably not. But those are some of the things that I'm looking at in terms of ways to spur innovation, get more for our money, make the competition work, and avoid vendor lock. All with a simple goal: get the best product at the best price.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Chairman, I'm going to remember vendor lock for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I had not heard that term until a couple of weeks ago when I met with the F-35 folks at the Air Force. So
it's a great phrase. Thank you. We'll now turn to Megan Eckstein from U.S. Naval Institute.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. Earlier, Mr. Smith, you mentioned the Marine Corps' plans to reshape the force. And I just wondered, they sent forward a divest to invest plan that included some big moves, including divesting of all their tanks. The Navy did the same thing, sending you a divest to invest plan, including getting rid of some ships. And the Marine Corps' plans seem to be pretty well received, whereas the Navy's has been pretty well rejected by members of your committee. And, beyond the obvious of ships are bigger and more expensive, I wonder what you think accounts for the difference in how the 2 plans were received and where the committee might go as it relates to the Navy plan.
I have not analyzed that question in depth, so I'm speculating here, which is risky, but I think it's important for reasons that I hope to make obvious. As I'm talking about, I've talked about some of the problems with vendor lock, dealing with the contractors. Certainly there's the culture at the Pentagon that creates a tendency to not innovate. They don't reward risk taking at the Pentagon. The Silicon Valley cliche of we tolerate failure. The Pentagon doesn't tolerate failure particularly well. Now they will say there are lives on the line, so that's what we're talking about, and I get that. But the type of failure I'm talking about is empower people to make decisions, to be creative, to be innovative. And yes, sometimes they're going to err, but that's better than locking them into a situation where it really doesn't matter who's there because you're just checking a box to work your way up. Congress is also part of the problem because there is a certain way of looking at our job as being my job is to bring home as much money to my district. I've never looked at my job that way. One of the very first votes that I took in Congress was to not build more B-2 bombers. And that was built in large part in my district. It's $2 billion a copy. I didn't think it was the right choice. I voted against it. And I survived just fine politically. If you have clear rationale and clear justification, you can do that. As you know as well as I do, Congress does not always take that approach. You know, and there's a reason why the defense contractors make their large ticket items so that, you know, they're made in like 75 congressional districts, okay, so they can build support. There will always be pushback based on your parochial concerns, and we need to balance those. So I think the parochial concerns in the Navy world are perhaps a little bit more intense than they are in the Marine Corps world. But we're going to have to fight those fights. And let me also say, a member is not necessarily wrong just because the thing's built in their district. We also have to analyze what the right choice is. But all of that is what is working against the type of innovation that I think we're going to need in defense. And sorry, the final point that I think is important on this is all that's really difficult. It's become necessary because of how competitive the world is. There was this glorious time after World War II when we so dominated the world that we had an enormous amount of flexibility. My favorite, I read the book The 50s by David Halberstam, and one of the things he mentioned was how GM in the 1950s had 50% of the global automobile market. 50% of the global market, GM. You know, but then they were running into problems with workers going on strike. And finally, the way it's described is the leadership at GM said, you know, this is annoying. What do you want? Okay, we've got a mountain of cash behind us that we can't even see the end of. So here, take it and get out of our hair. We're not in that world anymore. We are in a very competitive world. We cannot afford to be as wasteful and to indulge some of those other, well, luxury is the wrong word, but we got to be more efficient. We got to be more effective if we're going to compete, given how the world has changed in the last 50 years.
Yes, sir. And then in closing, sir?
Yep.
May I ask the final one?
Sure.
One of the things that we're really trying to get across is to the wheat farmer in Oklahoma, regardless of whatever the top line is, right? What is that one? What's the one takeaway message about that you want them to have about whatever amount that is funded this year about the combat power in terms of the money that you're going to give to the Department of Defense?
Well, I'm going to cheat and give you two.
Yes, sir.
One is you're getting your money's worth.
Yes, sir.
And not to keep coming back to the F-35, but that's what really sort of sent me over the edge is, okay, you know, $38,000 an hour instead of $25,000, it's late, okay, you know, sustainment costs are more, we got this whole engine problem.
Yes, sir.
You know, but it's not even hitting the capability target.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I'm sort of reminded of the Seinfeld episode where Elaine was supposed to go bid on these golf clubs for her boss. JFK had played with them, and he gave her a ceiling. This is only how much you can spend, and she went crazy and spent like 3 times as much. And okay, well, fine. Where are the clubs? Well, you know, I don't actually have them. All right. It's like, yeah. If I'm going to spend that much money, at least give me
Right.
value.
It's like the soup Nazi.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. So number one, give us value.
Yes, sir.
Number two, the message I send to them is, we can do this, okay? You know, part of the thing on the Armed Services Committee is we scare the hell out of everybody 24/7. We're not ready for this. We're not ready for that. The world's coming to an end. China's going to get us. Terrorists going to get us. We didn't build this. We can do this, okay? We are still the richest, most powerful country on earth. We can absolutely defend ourselves for $715 billion using just DOD dollars. We can do this, okay? Let's stop freaking out about it, and let's just get it done, because we are in a position to do that.
Yes, sir. Well spoken.
Jeremy?
Thank you.